Ellen DeGeneres had interviewed countless inspirational speakers and life coaches throughout her decades-long career, from people who had overcome addiction to individuals who had transformed their lives after major setbacks. But nothing could have prepared her for the afternoon when what seemed like a routine conversation about personal redemption and second chances would explode into one of the most confrontational and morally complex situations she had ever faced. What started as an uplifting story about transformation became a reckoning when Ellen realized that her guest's inspiring narrative had conveniently omitted crucial details about the people who had been harmed along the way. It was a hopeful Thursday afternoon at the Ellen Studios, and the atmosphere was optimistic as they prepared for what was scheduled to be an encouraging episode about overcoming adversity, personal growth, and the power of reinvention. Ellen, wearing a sophisticated royal blue blazer over charcoal pants, was looking forward to interviewing Derek Williams, a 45-year-old motivational speaker and life coach whose remarkable transformation from troubled youth to successful entrepreneur had made him a sought-after speaker, an author of a best-selling memoir about redemption and personal responsibility. Derek's story was exactly the kind of inspiring narrative that Ellen loved to feature, someone who had overcome a difficult past, had dedicated himself to helping others avoid his mistakes, and had built a meaningful career around sharing lessons learned from his journey. According to his preliminary materials, Derek had grown up in poverty, had made serious mistakes in his 20s, had served time in prison, and had emerged determined to use his experiences to guide young people away from destructive choices. Our next guest proves that your past doesn't have to define your future, Ellen announced to the attentive studio audience. He went from making terrible choices to helping thousands of people make better ones. His story reminds us that everyone deserves a second chance, and that redemption is always possible with hard work and genuine change. Please welcome motivational speaker and author Derek Williams. The audience offered warm, supportive applause as Derek walked onto the stage with confident, charismatic energy. He was a well-dressed man with an engaging smile and polished presentation skills, wearing a perfectly tailored gray suit that suggested professional success. What struck Ellen most was his natural ability to command attention and project authority, someone who had clearly mastered the art of public speaking and inspiring confidence in others. Derek, welcome to the show, Ellen said warmly as they embraced with the standard friendliness she showed all guests. Thank you so much for having me. Ellen, this platform means everything to someone like me who's trying to make amends for past mistakes, Derek replied, his voice carrying the practiced sincerity of a professional speaker. Tell us about your transformation. What were you like before you changed your life? Derek's expression became appropriately serious as he began his well-rehearsed narrative. Ellen, I was angry, selfish, and destructive. I made choices that hurt people and damaged communities. I was involved in illegal activities that I'm not proud of, and I spent 3 years in prison paying for those choices. What was the turning point that made you want to change? It was sitting in that prison cell, realizing that I had wasted my potential and hurt innocent people along the way, Derek said with apparent emotion. I made a commitment to spend the rest of my life making up for the harm I had caused. As Derek spoke about his redemption journey, Ellen noticed a woman in the fourth row who seemed to be listening with intense and growing agitation. She was a middle-aged African-American woman wearing a simple black dress, and her expression was becoming increasingly upset as Derek continued his story. Derek, you've written a best-selling book about your transformation. What's the main message you want people to take away? That everyone can change. Ellen, that no matter how far you've fallen, you can rebuild your life and contribute positively to society. I've worked with thousands of young people, showing them that there's always a path forward. Ellen noticed that the woman in the black dress was now visibly shaking and had tears of anger rather than inspiration in her eyes. Derek, when you talk about the people you hurt in your past, do you ever have contact with them? Have you made direct amends? Derek's confident demeanor flickered slightly. Ellen, part of moving forward sometimes means leaving the past behind. I've focused my energy on preventing future harm rather than dwelling on situations that can't be changed. The woman in the audience suddenly stood up, her voice cutting through the studio with raw emotion. You never made amends to me, Derek. You destroyed my life, and you never even apologized. Ellen felt the energy in the studio shift dramatically as all attention turned to the woman who had interrupted. Ma'am, I'm sorry, but Ellen, Please, the woman said, her voice trembling with years of suppressed pain. This man is sitting here talking about redemption, but he raped me 22 years ago and ruined my entire life. He's never acknowledged what he did, never tried to make it right. Ellen felt her blood run cold as she looked between Derek, who had gone pale, and the woman whose pain was radiating throughout the studio. Derek, do you know this woman? Derek's polished composure was cracking under the pressure. Ellen, there may have been incidents in my past that I remember differently. Remember differently. The woman shouted, now openly crying. You held me down in a parking garage after a party. You told me no one would believe me because you were popular, and I was nobody. I never reported it because I was 17 and terrified. Ellen felt sick as she realized the magnitude of what was unfolding. Derek, is what she's saying true? Derek was clearly struggling to maintain his public persona, while facing an accusation that could destroy everything he had built. Ellen, I was a different person then. I was using drugs, making terrible choices. I don't remember many things from that period clearly. The woman, whose name Ellen learned was Patricia Johnson, stepped closer to the stage. You remember enough to write a book about how you've changed, but you don't remember destroying a teenage girl's life. Ellen felt torn between her responsibility as a host and her horror at what was being revealed. Patricia, I can't imagine how difficult this must be for you. How has this affected your life? Patricia wiped tears from her face as she spoke with devastating honesty. I never trusted men again. I never had a healthy relationship. I dropped out of college because I couldn't handle being around people. I've been in therapy for 20 years trying to heal from what he did to me. Ellen looked at Derek, who was clearly calculating how to respond to save his reputation. Derek, regardless of what you remember or don't remember, how do you respond to Patricia's pain? Derek attempted to return to his motivational speaker mode. Ellen, I'm deeply sorry that Patricia has experienced pain. If I was involved in causing that pain, I want her to know that the person I was then is not the person I am today. Patricia's voice rose with anger. That's not an apology. That's not even an acknowledgement. You're still protecting yourself instead of taking responsibility. Ellen felt the moral complexity of the situation weighing on her. Derek, Patricia is asking for accountability, not just general remorse about your past. Derek looked cornered and desperate. Ellen, I've dedicated my life to helping people. I've changed thousands of lives for the better. Dwelling on specific incidents from over 20 years ago doesn't serve anyone. It serves me. Patricia shouted, it serves every woman you hurt who never got justice. You get to profit from your redemption story while we're still living with the trauma you caused. Ellen made a decision that felt both difficult and necessary. Derek, I think you need to address Patricia directly, not through me. Derek reluctantly turned to face Patricia, his confident facade completely gone. Patricia, I'm sorry you've experienced pain. If my actions contributed to that pain, I regret it. Patricia shook her head with disgust. You still can't even say what you did. You can't even use the word rape. How is that taking responsibility? Ellen felt the weight of facilitating what was essentially a confrontation between a rapist and his victim on live television. Patricia, what would you need from Derek to feel like justice had been served? Patricia's voice was steady despite her tears. I need him to admit what he did. I need him to stop profiting from a fake redemption story that erases his victims. I need him to face legal consequences if it's not too late. Derek's panic was now visible. Ellen, this is character assassination. I've worked hard to rebuild my life and help others. This woman is trying to destroy everything I've accomplished. You destroyed everything I could have accomplished. Patricia fired back. You don't get to play victim when you're the perpetrator. Ellen addressed the stunned audience and cameras. Folks, what we're witnessing is the complex reality of harm, accountability, and what real redemption looks like. This is not what any of us expected today. She looked back at Derek with deep disappointment. Derek, your response to this confrontation is showing us who you really are. Real redemption requires facing the full truth of what you've done. Derek made one last attempt to salvage his image. Ellen, I've spent 20 years helping people. Doesn't that count for anything? Patricia answered before Ellen could respond. Not if it's built on lies and denial. Not if you're using other people's pain as a stepping stone for your career. Ellen felt clear about what needed to happen. Derek, I think this interview is over. Patricia, thank you for your courage in speaking your truth. 3 weeks later, Ellen provided an update that Derek's speaking engagements had been cancelled. His book had been pulled from major retailers, and Patricia had connected with a legal advocacy group to explore her options for seeking justice. 6 months later, Patricia appeared on Ellen's show Alone to discuss her healing journey and her work with other survivors of sexual assault. She had used a moment of confrontation as a catalyst for deeper healing and advocacy work. Patricia Ellen said during the follow-up episode, "How has it felt to finally confront Derek publicly?" "Empowering and exhausting," Patricia replied honestly. "For 20 years, I felt like I was carrying this secret shame. Speaking my truth publicly helped me understand that the shame was never mine to carry." What would you want other survivors to know? That their truth matters, even if it's inconvenient for other people. That healing doesn't require forgiveness, and justice doesn't have an expiration date. Ellen felt deeply moved by Patricia's strength and clarity. What that day taught all of us is that real redemption requires facing the full truth of our actions and their consequences, not just crafting a convenient narrative about change. The episode sparked national conversations about accountability, the limitations of redemption narratives that center perpetrators rather than victims, and the importance of believing survivors. Sometimes, Ellen would say in subsequent interviews, the most important moment in a person's redemption journey is when they stop trying to redeem themselves and start centering the people they've harmed. Derek missed that opportunity, but Patricia showed us what real courage looks like. Because sometimes the most powerful healing happens when truth finally has space to be spoken, and sometimes justice means simply being believed after years of being silenced.